Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of American Gods. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there is that opening situation, which I thought was kind of fascinating. Obviously, that point in, American history, what was it called? I'm blanking on the name of it, but obviously you had all those different shows. You had like Maximilian, the Magnificent, and then you even saw the Technical Boy, which I think is really interesting because this is the furthest back in the Technical Boy's history that we've seen so far. Because I think prior to this was the whole Donar storyline last season. So and I think this is even, because it's like him in a more meager experience. I think this is probably him when he's barely got his feet off the ground as a god, because obviously technology, as we've kind of come to know it, was still in its fledgling stage, and I think obviously he was like that as well. But obviously, like that whole situation where it's like, oh, he's impressing so many people, because obviously Maximilian, it's like, oh, he was just kind of like, oh, here's this trick, and it's like the little boy's like, hey, I think it's your handkerchief is going to be in that egg, and he's like, oh, what a charming boy, and kind of ruined the magic of it. And him getting close to the Technical Boy, even kind of be like, oh, you put all your money into this, oh, you need a little more pizzazz. Basically, you need and like Edison, which I'm wondering, is that a true story about Edison? I mean, obviously, there's a whole complicated thing that you learn as you get older about Edison. Once again, it's interesting how history is at. Like, really quickly, like, once again, I remember being in elementary school, we talk about Columbus, and then as you get older, you realize, you're like, oh my God, Columbus was the biggest piece of shit. Like, it's interesting how you don't immediately start off learning that. It's not till later years. Like, I guess when it's older, when you're supposed to kind of understand, like, really, it's kind of, I guess you're old enough to process that human beings are terrible, especially when you look back on history. But nevertheless, but the whole thing was a point I was making, because like there's obviously that thing about like I'm not well versed in everything Edison, but there's always a thing of like, yeah, Edison stole a lot of his ideas. Supposedly. I mean, there might be truth to that. Like I said, I'm not well versed in Edison to say that for like, oh, historically, it's just always something I've heard. So I don't know if it is historical fact. It's just something I've always heard. But nevertheless, it's like Edison was like, you got to fake it till you make it, because he didn't make he actually sold the idea of the light bulb to people before he actually invented it. And so Technical Boy kind of got caught up in it, and the moment Home Dude was there, I was like, wait, and he exposed this Technical Boy, and it's like, oh, you want real magic, blah, 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 come see this, something you can only see to believe. And then he's like, well, welcome to Chicago, kid, which I thought immediately, like, I took that as the moral of the lesson being, hey, be careful who you trust and put your faith in. And as a god, the irony behind that statement, that's what I took that as, but maybe I'm missing the ball on that situation. But like I said, that's kind of what I took from it. But other than that, we had the Bill Quit situation with obviously the other gods coming to her. It's like you've kind of lost yourself. Once again, it's like, what we've been kind of building up with her story of, because she brought up something I thought was interesting. It's like, did you get what you needed from Ocean was like, did you get what you needed from Sanders? And she was like, no. His emptiness just added to my own. So like anytime she's ever consumed people, all it did was just fill that empty void inside of her. And it's something she talks about later on. And, the episodes have been building that aspect of like, she's kind of lost her own identity, because who she is now as Bilquis is who other people have painted her as. And they were helping her kind of rediscover who she is. It's like, this is your power. Your eyes are your eyes are clear, but they're not seeing the truth yet. And, and it's like the power of like, the water and the earth. This is always your power. It's time for you to reclaim it. And in that moment, because for her, it's like, what's the point of, I think at first she was almost kind of like, what was the point of coming to my truth? Like, what's the point of facing this now? But in that moment, she kind of did a little like earth bending and water bending at the same time, and kind of flooded the room in that moment. And then like, the Technical Boy and Shadow were there about to bust her out, but then like the door opens and like everyone's trapped in like this cube, like the water is just like steel and everyone's trapped in it. And obviously the Technical Boy is kind of glitching out, because I guess Bilquis is like, I guess the closer they are to each other, the worse his situation gets. So that was really interesting, but he immediately runs away. And then Bilquis is like, hey, Shadow, did you come to rescue me? He was like, no, He's like, and she's like, well, and they just kind of bounce. But I like I said, I like that conversation they had, because it brings this interesting conversation about, like, I mean, it's almost like self-reflection to a certain extent. That's kind of what that storyline is, because it's like seeing yourself the way other people see you, because it's like, because for her, she's like, it took 2 days in prison for me to realize I've been locked up for like 1,000 years, because she's basically been inherent to how people view her. Like, you know, all these people who worship her, they worship her the way they want to see her. Like, basically, and because even Shadow was like, how does that even happen? How do you lose your self-identity as a god? Essentially, she was saying, like, basically, when they're kind of praying to us, they shape us into basically their needs, and they basically show that back to us like a mirror. So they kind of cloud us in a veil, and we only see ourselves in the way they see us, because obviously I think it plays into the whole, like, you kind of, well, you need to worship, and you're like, well, they worship me this way, this must be how, you know. So she lost her identity along the way, but she doesn't plan, obviously never giving it up again, kind of taking her steps towards freedom. I think that was the thing, like, what's the point of knowing the truth when I still don't have my freedom? And with that truth came some freedom, came clarity. And she's kind of bringing it up to Shadow, with Shadow's talking about the fact that slowly but surely he's kind of making his way, that he's not going back to the past. And she's like, not ever. You know, and they have that moment at the restaurant. It's like, you know, it's like, why did you come? He was like, you needed help. She's like, but I felt like there was more. And I think it's for him, it's like, because he failed, in his mind, it's like he failed the other women in his life. Laura, he couldn't save her from herself. His mom, he had to watch her wither away. He couldn't do anything for her. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing, kind of explanation of kind of, I think, what was the driving force behind this. I also thought was interesting, he called the property manager, and the way she was coiling with the telephone cord, you're like, oh man, like, I was like, oh wow, this is something. So it's like, you know, she's like, I'm glad you called. He's like, yeah, I'll be back in a couple of days. So it's like, all right, there's definitely them hitting it off there. Then let's quickly jump into the whole Demeter situation. Obviously, we find out, like, oh yeah, Wednesday was super faking it, because, like, the moment Demeter was watching him and walking away, he peeked open, like, she cares about me. She wants to pretend like she doesn't, but she still got a thing for the old Odin, you know. So Shadow shows up and realizes, like, oh, this was all a con and everything. So, but it's like, Wednesday needs his help. And it's like, hey, like, we're going to run a 37. And obviously Shadow's kind of reluctant at first until Wednesday brings up, she's my wife. And I think because of his own circumstances, as he kind of talked about the whole Laura thing, I think that kind of steered, because that's still always going to be like a trigger a little bit for him. And I think that made him a little more sympathetic to be like, all right. Because also it's like, he found out, like, oh, this is your wife. And it's like, you're a husband trying to help your wife, which I think on some level he can, you know, obviously I think on the level of, hey, he couldn't help his mom. He wanted to help Laura, couldn't. So I think that's kind of what triggered that. And obviously they meet, and she was even shocked by, wait, this is your son? And he's just kind of looking like, huh. So part of me wonders, is it like, with some of the stuff that's brought up later on in the episode, and I could be mistaken, part of me wonders, did Demeter and Odin have kids? Because at first I was like, once again, mythology and stuff like that, but part of me was I'm sure because Freya is like their mom, in particular, like, but I was wondering in this continuity, I was like, could Demeter have been Donar's mom and losing him? Because she later on talks about the fact is that they had went through a lot, and then going through a lot, it basically hardens your heart, because all you can grip onto is to, like, look at, all you can do is get a vague memory of what could have been. So it seemed like she was almost talking from the perspective of, like, they lost something. Almost like it sounded like a child. I don't know if I was reading too much into that. Because that's why I was almost like, is that why she was looking at Shadow like, wait, what? Because, or maybe it's because she knows about the Donar situation. So she's like, whoa, you have another kid? Like, you know, she wasn't expecting that. I don't know. I didn't know what to really kind of take from that. But I did like, you know, because what even sparked this even more for Shadow is when he talked to Cordelia, because Cordelia's like, yeah, I don't think this whole thing's a con. Like, he was kind of like night at prom, nervous, shaking, like, oh, like, got a new suit, like, oh, how do I look? Like, she was saying, like, so for her, she feels like it's a little more like, hey, there might be more to this, that he might be a little real. Because obviously Shadow's like, I've been around Wednesday enough to know his bullshit. Like everything he does is like, for a selfish reason, because even he's like, all you're going to do is just take her money and bounce. Like you want to free her just so you can take her fortune. He's like, yeah, as a con artist, he knows all there is to like, another con artist. He, obviously there's a lot of similarities in that regard to Wednesday. I mean, obviously he's been caught in Wednesday's con artist trap firsthand, so it's understandable why he'd kind of be able to see through it. But I think that did kind of hit him to be like, oh, so because I think for him, he thinks he kind of has Wednesday figured out, but like maybe there is more to Wednesday. I don't know. I did like the whole con that they enacted. I even loved during part of it, he puts on I believe an Australian accent, which, if you're unaware, Ricky Whittle, the actor who plays Shadow, is actually New Zealand actor. The reason why I bring that up too is because I didn't know that until I started watching American Gods. Because when he was linking on the 100, I don't think I knew that. Maybe I did know that, but maybe I didn't remember until I started watching American Gods. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting. I was like, why not just give him doing a New Zealand? I will admit, sometimes I think I do confuse a New Zealand accent and Australian accent, which I'm sure is kind of blasphemous. They sound, I think, to an untrained ear, like myself, because I'm not the master of accents. I think that probably, to an untrained ear, you probably can't tell the difference. But I'm sure any New Zealander or an Australian would be like, you idiot, how can you not tell the difference? I know. But not only were they forcing Hutchison to hey, not only are you going to release Demeter, or we're going to threaten to release all your files, and also we're going to need this 100K, which I'm wondering what they're going to do with that 100K. It might just be personal. Maybe it'll be funding whatever Cordelia does with Wednesday. Because even she was like, oh, should I kind of bail? And he was like basically she was like, how should I get out? Should I get a new job? He's basically like, yeah, but she's not going to because she's going to stick around. There was part of me that was wondering, and I just threw this out there just because I think this episode was called something like Sister something. And part of me was, and the thumbnail of the episode, because I was watching on the Starz app, and I was like, I was wondering what I was like, I thought, just looking at the thumbnail and the title, I was like, are we going to find out Cordelia's actually Shadow's sister or something like that? That's why I was wondering, is that why, Wednesday's taking... I mean, we know why he took an interest in Shadow, so I was wondering, could the same possibility be true about Cordelia? Maybe she isn't just a regular human, that there's going to be a reveal about her in some connection to him. Maybe not. I don't know, especially because the parallels of Shadow watching Cordelia kind of go down literally the same road he went down literally for the past 2 seasons. I don't know what to make of that. Maybe she is just a regular human that he's fond of. Maybe there's more to that. Maybe it's not. We'll see. But nevertheless, I'm also I thought it was fascinating because once again, Shadow is because even Shadow confronts Wednesday, and it's there's definitely more to this in that. This was your wife. He's like, wives come and go. It's if you really believe that, you wouldn't be going through this much trouble, getting yourself locked up here. And it's it isn't just about the money. It's got to be more than that. But when Demeter had said that whole thing about what they'd been through and the memory of what could have been, he had this look on his face. You never see Wednesday like that, solemn like that. It struck a nerve. It struck a chord with him, and I thought that was so fascinating because I feel normally under some circumstances he'd be a little quippy-ish or something like that. Because it seems more often than not Wednesday acts like he's 100% in control, and that just looked like that was a moment of what Demeter said just kind of knocked him off kilter. Because, maybe her perspective on things made him go he wants to pretend, because even Shadow was go ahead and say whatever you want to, but, there is a lot more to this than you're kind of making it seem like. There is a lot more heart to this. And maybe hearing that made him, it's just he probably tries to, it's he means to an end, he tries to treat it like that because I guess for him it's there's no room for love and feelings on the battlefield. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But another element to this was the whole situation with I love Salim is at in Cairo, and it's he's Ibis, Jaquel, and Salim, and it's I'm not going to teach you mortuary skills. He's I'm not asking you to, and he's basically teaching Ibis we could do this, and this, and expand the business. And I love that he puts on this big smile, and Ibis is we're not in the business of selling products. And it is just this awkward thing of like, just go out there. All you're doing is just moping around here. You're trying to distract yourself from the whole situation with the djinn. He's not going to come back here. But then Laura pops up and they're like, holy shit, wait, you're alive? What went down? It's like, oh, a spell. Like, oh, Mad was able to bring you back. It's like, nah, this spell from Sandy didn't really work. It's like, okay, and they're trying to figure it out. It's like, oh, the love of potion, the love, the final ingredient, blood of two lovers. Laura just kind of quickly kind of breezes over that. Doesn't really acknowledge it that too much, but it's just kind of like, well, I'm hungry. But then Salim, it's like, it's like, oh, so what about Mad? And it's like, well, here he is in a box. And I think for Salim, it's like, yeah, they had a rough patch, but it's still, I think it's still not the easiest thing, especially because it's like, well, especially because now it seems like, oh, so there was something between you and Mad. And obviously him going through the most recent love situation he has with the djinn is like, I don't know where he is. I might spend the rest of my life wondering, like, whether what we had was real or not, But for him, it was still kind of like basically finding something like that, finding someone that kind of loved you like that, and kind of confirmation that someone loved you, because it's like that spell wouldn't have worked if he didn't feel like, if there wasn't something there. So it's a little bit of a confirmation of like, yeah, he's gone, but at least you kind of have that confirmation that what you had was something special, And so now it's like, what are you going to do? And Salim's kind of like, I don't know. Cause she's like, you just need like, basically I think because of her experience, it's kind of like, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. You need to do something. You can't just mope around. So it's like, what are you going to do? She's like, well, I'm going to go kill Wednesday. And he's like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah. It's like, I'm not really all about murder and stuff. She's like, it's fine. You can just come on a road trip with me so I'm not lonely. Which I'm like, oh, we're continuing kind of like the Laura Mad thing, which I guess technically we're still continuing, considering I think she's still keeping Mad's ashes with her. So I'm wondering will anything come about that? Maybe not. I mean, it might play a role in she needs to get Gungnir because that's a surefire way. I'm sure for her it's like, killing him with the spear that ended up killing Mad is probably poetic justice. Killing him, also it's being his own spear. I think that's the poeticness to it. But she still needs to get it from Mad. Get it from Mad's horde. So there's still going to be like there still needs to be a workaround for that. But I love Ibis giving them the truck and the car and everything. It's like, take this. It's like, are you doing this just because you're generous or because you want me to leave? And Ibis being like, yes. But they're on the road and, obviously Salim hears obviously from her firsthand about where she's been, obviously, purgatory and everything. He's like, oh, no 72 virgins. She's like, not a single one. But it's a whole thing of like it not being what you expected. And even Salim, they're like, oh, that's not what I thought. But it's like she notices like, you're not praying as much either. And he was like, he thought it's funny. He's like, that coming from like the hardcore atheist that you are. It's like, why do you care? She's like, I don't care, but you do. And it was something that was important to him. And once again, I think that's so interesting. Where like you have so many different character storylines kind of coalescing in certain interesting ways. Like Bilquist just kind of went on a journey of self-discovery. Shadow's kind of in the middle of one. And you have characters like Salim and Laura who are as well. Whereas Laura is kind of in the process of kind of finding herself a little bit more. Salim kind of has found himself being a little lost. Where it seemed like before he was probably a little more surefire. Now he's kind of lost. Even to the point he's like, I don't know who to pray to or even what for. So that's kind of interesting that the person who had no faith is with the person who's kind of lost theirs, and kind of what that will turn into down the road is kind of fascinating to think about. Because it does seem like obviously coming back to life has changed Laura. Her experiences in purgatory, what she saw, what she experienced, changed her. And I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of like where that takes her, as well as like what kind of effect that has on everyone else kind of around her. That's definitely going to be real interesting. Then there's also the whole thing with the technical boy when he was running away. He made his way back to like that creation he had all those years ago. I guess it's supposed to be kind of like his comfort zone, kind of taking him back. Like I think it's probably maybe that's a place he kind of escapes to when he's at his weakest, and he's just like, and may like in this like feeling what he's feeling right now is probably like that was kind of like his place to just kind of escape from everything. It's just kind of like this was kind of like his meager quote unquote meager beginnings, and I think maybe latching on to that, it helps him like when he's confused and everything, because it's like whatever it is that Bilquis did to him is not fixing itself on its own, and I think he was too afraid to be around Bilquis because when she was closer to him, it just started going into overdrive. So whether there's going to be any fixing that, how Mr. World's going to feel about that too, because I think depending on what the world situation is going to be, whether it's Mr. or Mrs., but it's like, well, Mr. or Miss, might be like, yeah, I kind of don't need you right now, especially in this condition. You kind of know, I mean, there might even be more reason why he's hiding, because it's like, I can't let the boss person find out about my situation, because that's going to be shitty. We've seen already what happened before when I wasn't like 100%, got, reprogrammed essentially. So it's like, I'm probably not about to go through that again. So we'll see where things kind of go on that front. But, Shadow finds his way back to town. I keep want to say Lakeview. It's Lakeside, right? I always confuse that now. I think it's Lakeside, right? And obviously he's back in town, and obviously there's arguments because it turns out, oh, hey, which once again, I think is that beautiful nature and that beautiful moment of it all where it's just kind of like a, hey, like he's like, oh, hey, what's up, Derek? And it's like finding his place, it's like, I think, what he was kind of talking with Bilquis, like moving past the past and kind of finding a place, he was kind of making that progress. Like, I think he's finding at least Lakeside for now is kind of becoming that place he's settling in, getting to know people, not kind of just hiding away from people, and kind of becoming his own little community. And I love the whole thing of like, what's going on? It's like, well, there's more like women's underwear going missing, and now people are thinking, some people are starting to speculate it might be connected to Allison, and it's like, okay. And it's like, well, what do you think? She's like, I'm from Missouri on that one. But then it's like, oh, there's someone ordering pie next to him, and I was like, oh, is it going to end up being Bilquis? And it ended up being Laura, and I was like, of course it would, because I forgot, because Ebis was like, well, if you're looking for Wednesday, there's one person who would definitely know how. What's interesting too is she wasn't able to track Shadow like she normally is. I mean, granted, I would think like the light would still be, but obviously she can't see him like that because maybe he's not quite her light. But she's like, hey, stranger. And it's like, whoa, he's seeing Laura. Obviously it's like going to be like a, wait, you're human. Obviously I've got my own complex feelings about everything, which is interesting too, because let's not forget him and a property manager are kind of hitting it off. So what's that going to turn into? But it's like, it's going to be like, hey, so I need your help tracking down your dad. But also I think, once again, to see how things have changed for her and, what kind of, I mean, especially because things are changing for Shadow as well. So they're both growing and changing. And, could this be the potential to bring them back together? Or has she figured some stuff out? Has he figured some stuff out? It's going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode, especially considering like, Shadow knows what Wednesday's up to. He knows the whole Demeter thing. So it's like, do I want Laura to kind of get mixed up in all of that? Because, could be some casualties in the crosshair. Like, she might be gunning for him. And it's like, regardless of anything, that's still my dad. So, nevertheless, I'm interested to see, where everything else ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.